What's up, guys? Welcome back to the MMA meeting. Let's talk with the Weasel podcast, where we talk all things MMA. So Big Onk and Poatan seems like they're going to have their rematch. As I mentioned a few times, both fighters can win the rematch. I think Ankalaev is going to win, though. Just because if Alex gets more aggressive, it's going to take away a lot of the light kicks. Because as soon as he starts light kicking, Ankalaev is going to be pressuring him. So if he wants to stop that pressure, he can't throw as many kicks. He has to rely more on his other striking techniques, like his punches, knees, high kicks. But that starts playing into Ankalaev's game. Ankalaev is a counter striker. He is not a lead fighter first. So if Alex goes forward and he starts throwing punches, he could get countered and knocked out. And usually when a fighter loses their belt, they don't reclaim it. It was rare when Adesanya beat Alex after losing to him, but usually it doesn't go like that. Usually when the fighter loses their belt, they lose the rematch as well, right? Aljamain Sterling versus Peter Yan. Even off a DQ, he still beat Yan in the rematch. Anderson Silva, Jose Aldo with Max Holloway. He didn't get the rematch, Conor. Adesanya when he lost to Sean Strickland. Daniel Cormier, although Stipe is another rare example where he won the belt back. But let's be honest, man, there was an eye poke in there. DC did poke him in the eye before landing the overhand. BJ Penn when he lost to Frankie Edgar. Frankie Edgar when he lost to Benson Henderson. Max Holloway when he lost to Alexander Volkanovski. There's a higher probability that the champion who has lost their belt will lose the rematch. And I think Ankalaev is only getting better. I don't think Alex is going to get better. Like, Alex might make changes to his style. He might be more aggressive in the rematch, but I don't think he necessarily gets better as a fighter. With Ankalaev, I think he's going to get better and change his style somewhat, some fine-tuning to make the rematch easier for himself. But that should be a great title fight, and hopefully they fight soon, right? Alex wants to fight often. He did say he needs some rest, but again, an Alex Pereira rest is like a few months. It's not like other champions who take like a year off. So hopefully they fight like an international fight week or something. That'd be cool. You guys see Ankalaev going crazy at Jiri Prochazka? Well, when I say Ankalaev, I really mean Ali Abdelaziz. I don't know why he's doing that. Why is he going after Jiri like that? Like, he's talking so much trash to him. I don't think Ankalaev would do that. I see Ankalaev as some like chill dude. Sits back, has a coffee shop, drinks his coffee, hangs out with his friends, that's it. But Ali Abdelaziz is like calling Jiri a fraud on Ankalaev's account. He said he's a terrible fighter and all this stuff. It's like, dude, like, yeah, if Ankalaev had beef with a certain fighter, that would make sense. I've never heard anyone talk about Jiri like that. And Jiri was actually kind of mad about it. He was saying Ankalaev is the fraud. It's like, dude, he thinks it's Ankalaev talking to him. Ali, what are you doing? Ankalaev is going to be going to the press conference one time, let's say they fight each other, and Jiri's going to have all this beef with him, and Ankalaev is going to be flabbergasted. Like, why does this guy hate me? And turn to Ali. Ali, what'd you say to him? Ali does have to chill with his fighters when he's speaking for them. Now, it could be that he ran some of those tweets across Ankalaev and Ankalaev approved, but I just don't imagine that, man. I mean, he was calling him a fraud, terrible fighter. He was going at other fighters too. It's like, dang, does he want Ankalaev to be looked at as like some kind of villain or something? Like, took down the hero Alex Pereira, now he's the villain. I don't think Ankalaev wants that, He doesn't have the charisma or the personality for that. But I do think in a fight with Jiri, it seems like some people think Jiri is like the guy that beats Ankalaev. I couldn't disagree more. I think Jiri is one of the easiest fights for Ankalaev in the weight class. A reckless, aggressive striker against Ankalaev. He has a very good chin. He's very durable. He has a lot of punching power. He's fast. He has decent head movement. But against Ankalaev, it's a different story. Like, he's a sharp counterpuncher compared to the other light heavyweights. He also has the wrestling to go to as well. And if he runs at Ankalaev, he's going to get knocked out. On the back foot, throws a left hand. Jiri's going to slip on the outside of it, as he did many times against Jamahal Hill, who's also a southpaw. Slip on the outside of it, up comes the head kick, KOs Jiri Prochazka. That's the exact sequence I can see Ankalaev winning the fight with. So now that Alex Pereira lost to Ankalaev, he went down 5 spots to number 8. Ankalaev is now number 6. Tom Aspinall went down 2 spots. Leon went down 3. Holloway went down 1, so did O'Malley and Oliveira. I don't really have much of an issue with the top 5, or even the top 7, honestly, except for one. Alexandre Pantoja. He's now not the lowest ranked champion, as Tom Aspinall is below him, but for a champion, or just a fighter, who is 10-0 against the top 15, which includes some of the Ultimate Fighter fights, right? There's 2 in there. But I guess professionally it's 8-0 against the top 15. Still insane. And also being the second longest reigning champion in the UFC currently. Second most title defenses, second most title wins currently, behind Islam Makhachev. John Jones is heavyweight champ, he fought there twice, but Alexandre Pantoja is ranked number 9 when he should easily be in the top 5. I don't know if it's the journalists, as we're always been told that the journalists are the ones that make the rankings, or it's the UFC. Well, one of them don't like Pantoja. I don't understand it. Like, unless it's just the flyweight bias, They don't like the flyweight division, or they don't like Pantoja specifically. The interest in flyweight has always been very low, ever since even Demetrius Johnson. It picked up when Moreno fought Figueiredo, but it seems after Pantoja became the champ and has been dominating his weight class, the interest isn't there again, even though they have one of the greatest flyweights of all time reigning over that division. And it's not like his weight class is weak. I mean, if his weight class is weak, with Brandon Royval, Brandon Moreno, Amir Albazi, Kai Kara-France, Tatsuro Taira, Manel Kape, Steve Erceg, Tagir Lambakov is coming up, so is Ramazan Tamarov, and maybe Joshua Van. If that weight class is weak, then how do we look at the heavyweights, light heavyweights, and even the middleweights? Because that weight class is stronger than all three of them. The only reason why a lot of people like middleweight and up compared to flyweight is just because the name value. Those guys have bigger names, but if you look at the actual fighters, like how good the fighters are, flyweight clears them. It's not even close. You have to be skilled in order to be one of the best flyweights in the world. You can't rely on attributes. Even Deiveson Figueiredo, when he was the champion, he didn't just rely on his attributes. He had insane knockout power, but he was also a very skilled fighter, highly technical. But from middleweight and up, you can just be one-dimensional and become champ. You can just be powerful and get really far. The flyweights are better than they've ever been before, right? Maybe Demetrius Johnson and Henry Cejudo and Joseph Benavidez and stuff. Like, there's certain fighters that were great in the past, but the division as a whole is better now than it's ever been in its entire history. And the crazy thing was, Demetrius Johnson was at one point the number one pound-for-pound fighter in the world. Alexandre Pantoja is not on DJ's level, but he's not that far away either. And he's number 9. The disrespect to Pantoja is absolutely ridiculous. This guy beat Brandon Royval twice. He beat Brandon Moreno 3 times. I mean, twice professionally, but 3 times overall. He beat Kai Kara-France in The Ultimate Fighter. He beat Manel Kape, Alex Perez, Steve Erceg, Kai Asakura. How is he below Ankalaev, Bilal, Alex Pereira? How is he below those 3? That doesn't make any sense. Honestly, even Dricus and Merab, I wouldn't put any of them above Pantoja. He just has way too many ranked wins, and he's been a longer champion than all of those guys. He has more title wins than all those guys, while also beating, again, more ranked fighters. I don't understand it. It has to be the name value. It has to be a popularity contest instead of actually how good these guys are. I can understand Ilia Topuria, like, he's up there because he actually is one of the best fighters in the world. What does pound for pound mean? Take away weight classes, if they're all at the same weight, who is the best fighter? But the UFC has changed it into a popularity contest and about like championship wins and stuff instead of actual skills. When apparently Ilia Topuria turned down Arman Tsarukyan, or said he's not interested in fighting the number 1 contender, he wants to fight Islam for a belt or anybody for the belt. And maybe it is the Islam fight. I think Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria is the best fight in the UFC. It's the highest skilled fight, and I think he's a more dangerous fight than Alexander Volkanovski was. But does he beat Islam? I don't think so. I can see it. He has a chance for sure, but I just don't see it, man. Like, the high kicks are going to be there. The takedowns. He's bigger, even though Ilya's saying he's 187 pounds, which is about the same weight as Islam, if that's true. I mean, I can't imagine he's that heavy, right? And if he's naturally 42 pounds heavier than featherweight, yo, that Islam fight might actually be a lot more dangerous for Islam. But as an early prediction, I just don't see him beating Islam. Islam is so good, man. And I was thinking about like all the fighters who do their face-offs or they enter the cage, like which one is the most intimidating? You have like Alex Pereira, who just walks to his corner and stares down his opponent from across the cage. You have Ian Cutelaba, who walks up to the opponent and then walks back to his corner. I honestly think the most intimidating is the way Charles Oliveira does it. He goes to hug his opponent, greets the opponent's corner, then walks back to his. It's such a power move, and you know this guy's a killer. He goes for the finish. That can throw you off, man. Super friendly, hugs you, high fives your corner, and then as soon as the fight starts, he's throwing flying knees and trying to take your head off, strangle you to death at every opportunity he can. It's literally from like 0 to 100. With Alex and Ian Cutelaba and some of these other fighters who try to intimidate his opponent, you already know what they're going to fight like. With Charles, it can throw you off, man. He's a fast starter and going for the finish as soon as the fight starts. And then which one's the most intimidating entrance? For me, it's either Ilia Topuria or Fedor, for different reasons. Fedor is coming out there like an assassin. He was hired by some CEO to take you out. No emotion whatsoever. His only goal is to finish you, and he has the skills to do it. Then Ilia Topuria, you can feel the confidence from the entrance, from the music of the strings playing from that guitar. And what is he saying during his entrance as he's walking out? Yolo Sone, I dreamt this. The man's working with like some visionary magic or something. There's something different about Ilia Topuria. You're fighting against the power of manifestation. You're trying to turn destiny on its own head when you're fighting someone like Ilia. But thankfully, the UFC might be going to Netflix. I can't wait for these fights to freeze every 20 seconds instead of crashing entirely. Do we not remember Jake Paul versus Mike Tyson? Probably the biggest news in the UFC currently, because it can reshape the whole pay-per-view thing. And hopefully they do. Hopefully they get rid of pay-per-views. It's such an outdated model, and apparently, according to the reports, The ESPN is not happy with the pay-per-view numbers. ESPN is saying the pay-per-view numbers are quote-unquote way down. Do you guys think they're going to drop the price from $80? They might go down to $79. Which do you guys think is the best broadcaster to just play the fights, without them crashing? And with ESPN not being happy with the pay-per-view numbers of the UFC, it just goes to show what I said before. There are no superstars. Some people were disagreeing with me. Like, they were telling me, no, man, Alex Pereira is a superstar. And I was like, he's a star to us, but he's not a superstar. Like, the average person doesn't know who he is, right? If you go around asking random people, do you know who Alex Pereira is? I guarantee most of them would not. If you ask them, do you know who Conor McGregor, Brock Lesnar, Ronda Rousey, Khabib, who are these guys? Most people will know them. And it's not just Alex. There are no superstars ever since Khabib and Conor, right? Khabib was the last superstar of the UFC. And that hurts the casual fans, I guess, reception, correlating to the lower pay-per-view numbers, right? So the casual fans aren't watching as much, according to the New York Post report. And if you look at the fight night quality, even hardcore fans are skipping some of these cards. Is our sport declining? Like, let's be honest here. Right? We talk about when the sport's doing great, but we don't really talk too much about when the sport is declining because it doesn't happen too often. So there isn't a superstar for the casual fans. The fight nights have been lower quality. There's a lower level of standard for the hardcore fans with how horrible these fight night cards have been. They're still in the apex for some reason. It feels very lazy. I mean, we used to have a crowded event for every card, but the fans are being conditioned to this lowered standard. The refs don't deduct points anymore for anything. I mean, Michael Chandler hitting Charles Oliveira in the back of the head like a million times. You get like 4 free eye pokes. Same with low blows, same with grabbing onto the fence. And then when it seems like for every card, there's a robbery, right? The pay-per-views are still good today, but they're $80, right? They're more expensive than they ever were. Bro, it was nearly impossible to watch the Alex Pereira and Magomed Ankalaev fight on ESPN+. And they're charging $80 for that. You have to subscribe and then buy. And they wonder why pay-per-view numbers are lower than ever. It's like, dude, in 2016, when Conor was at his peak, in his prime, fought 3 times that year, the pay-per-view cards were $60 in the United States. And it's like, in other countries, they were a fraction. Like, they're still a fraction of our prices. Everywhere around the world is cheaper than in the United States. And it's like, yeah, obviously the pay-per-view numbers are going to be lower. People are just not buying the fights anymore. They're way too expensive. And especially in today's economy, do you guys think the cards will be as good as they were during Fox? Because, man, I went back to 2015 and looked at every fight night card, and then I looked at 2024, and I'm just thinking, what happened? What happened to fight nights, bro? And all those better fight night cards in 2015 were in arenas with an audience. In 2024, and still onward, they're still stuck in the apex, bro. Can we get the fights out of there? That was supposed to be a temporary thing, and now it just feels like it's laziness. Like, yes, some of these knockouts and finishes are cool, but they would have been a lot better with an audience there. Like, dude, I've been watching since 2011, right? I've watched about 90% of the cards ever since. And to be honest, as a fan, given my customer review, the fight night quality has taken a nosedive in 2024. Now, some of the cards moving forward seem pretty good, like Leon versus Brady and Moreno versus Urseg, Jamal Hill versus Killer Roundtree, Sandhagen versus Figueiredo, Josh Emmett versus Laurel Murphy. Get that out of my face. Like, a lot of the fight night cards moving forward seem good, but it's still not up to the standard that we were used to for anybody who was watching during Fox. Bro, during Fox, fight nights were peak quality. Championship fights, #1 contender fights. You get Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze like 3 fights down from the main event, not it being the main event. Of course, not every card was like that, but that was the average common card where it felt like the fights mattered. These days, when you watch fight night cards, it's more just entertainment to see if there's some crazy knockout. A lot of these fights don't actually matter unless it's some fighter early in his career and then he eventually becomes champion or something like that, but that's very rare. Like, Vettori versus Dolidze is a fight between who's not going to be in the top 10 anymore, because neither of those guys are fighting for the belt. Neither of those guys are going to be in the top 5 moving forward. Bro, go back to 2015, right? Go back to 2015 and look at the fight night cards. I feel bad for the new fans that they never got to watch those cards live, and their standard is watching Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze and Marcin Tybura versus Sergey Spivak and Emmanuel Lemos versus Werner Jandiroba. Like, you get the occasional Israel Adesanya versus Nasruddin Imavov. Like, bro, those kind of fights, Adesanya versus Imavov, was a lot more regular back then. The last title fight on a fight night card was like back in 2022, I think, with Davison Figueiredo versus Brennan Moreno. 3 years ago was the last title fight. During the Fox era, they had multiple title fights for fight night cards every single year. Bro, I recommend everybody go back in 2015, look at the main events of every fight night card, and then look at 2024. It's not even close. And it's not being biased, it's not being subjective. It was objectively so much better during Fox. And hopefully with Netflix, hopefully they bring that back. And honestly, I think a big reason for that is because there's a lack of competition. There's no pressure for the UFC to do better. They are MMA. They've taken over the entire sport. Even though they're not technically a monopoly, right? Because there are other organizations. Those organizations nearly don't even exist anymore. You know, like they're tanking. PFL is tanking. They're not even allowing their fighters to fight. Like they're holding them hostage essentially. One championship is going totally to Muay Thai now. Like they aren't even having MMA fights that much anymore. And for them, I think they should go that direction. I think once Demetrius Johnson retired, they really had no one left. Even Reinier de Ridder came to the UFC, you know? Like, dude, back when Pride was around and when Strikeforce was around, the UFC had to compete. Like, they had to actually make their cards as good as they can. They knew if they didn't, that people would watch Pride or Strikeforce instead, right? Competition between organizations is a very good thing because it increases the quality of the cards. And I think one of the biggest mistakes that the UFC made was lowering the quality of the fight night cards. Because the fight night cards are for the hardcore fans. Like, we're the ones who are watching this, right? Casual fans are going to be watching Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze. That's for hardcore fans. And honestly, a lot of hardcore fans are skipping on some of these fight nights with how consistent, low quality these cards have been. There are some good ones, but the standard has dropped. And the reason why they do that is because they think the hardcore fans are always going to watch every single fight. But there comes to a point where the hardcore fans start to skip cards. Bro, people were saying, if you're watching Manel Kev versus Asu Almabayev, you have no life. And I heard the same thing about Marvin Vettori versus Roman Dolidze. These are like the average headliners of fight nights. I never used to see hardcore fans say that they're going to skip fight night cards. That's the biggest blunder that the UFC made. They're losing their hardcore fan base. The hardcore fans is the core of the UFC. It's what keeps it afloat. Because now they only have casual fans who are the most fickle by definition. They don't watch every card. They don't care about all the fighters. They only care about the big superstars or just the big stars in general. That's going to require the UFC to constantly have stars fighting. Then what happens to the fight nights if they lose the hardcore fans? In an extreme hypothetical, right? Let's say they keep going that route and gradually the hardcore fans starts to dwindle and decrease and they lose the entire hardcore fan base, right? Just hypothetically. They have to throw away all the fight nights and go back to when they used to do like one card a month, one card every other month. In my opinion, the best move the UFC should make is cater back to the hardcore fans because now they don't even have the superstar for the casual fans and their fight nights are low quality for the hardcore fans. Like nobody's happy with the product on average in general. There are a few cards that are good, but you look at the average fight night in the last year, a whole year, bro, like I could look at every fight night of 2024. I don't think I have to, but Ankalaev versus Walker. Okay, that's decent. Dolidze versus Imavov, Jack Hermanson versus Joe Pyfer, Brendan Moreno versus Brendan Royval was good, Jairzinho Rosenstrike versus the GOAT Shamil Gaziev. Okay, all right, that's a good one. That's a good one. No, I'm kidding. Like, what? Tai Tuivasa versus Marcin Tybura. Amanda Ribas versus Rose Namajunas. Aaron Blanchfield versus Menon Furat. Okay, I guess. I didn't mind that one. Brendan Allen versus Chris Curtis. Matthias Nicolau versus Alex Perez. I like the fight, but as a headliner, Derek Lewis versus Rodrigo Nascimento. Edson Barboza versus Lerone Murphy. Jared Cannonier versus Nezhny Imavov is a good fight. Right, that's decent. Alex Perez versus Tatsuro Taira. Then you have Robert Whittaker versus Ikram Aliskerov, which was supposed to be Khamzat Chimaev, right? So that was going to be a great one. That was a good fight night. Then we go to Rose Namajunas versus Tracy Cortez, which was originally supposed to be Macy Barber versus Rose Namajunas. And then Amanda Lemos versus Verna Jandiroba. Corey Sandhagen versus Umar Nurmagomedov was a good one. Bro, Saudi Arabia and Abu Dhabi have all the good fight night cards. Sandhagen versus Nurmagomedov, Whittaker versus Aliskerov. Like, they have the best fight night cards. And then after that, you get Marcin Tybura again versus Sergey Spivak. Jared Cannonier versus Kyle Baralo's good. Gilbert Burns versus Sean Brady's decent. Renato Moicano versus Benoit Saint Denis. I like Renato Moicano, but come on, man. As a headliner of a fight night, bro, we used to get championship fights on fight night cards. Number one contender fights on fight night cards. Then Brendan Royval versus Tatsuro Taira. Anthony Hernandez versus Michel Pereira. Brendan Moreno versus Miro Bazzi's decent. Neil Magny versus Carlos Prates. Peter Yan versus Davison Figueiredo is a very good one. That's another good fight night card. And that was in China. And then Colby Covington versus Joaquin Buckley was a very good one. So, was it like, you can count on one hand how many good fight night cards there were last year? Bro, the fight night quality took a nosedive in 2024. And apparently it's supposed to be the best time to watch the UFC. Says who? Now, of course, the UFC's not dying or anything, not to exaggerate. They still have some good fights. The pay-per-view quality is still good. And of course, we're all going to still watch. It's just, as a fan of the sport, you wanted to see it do better. You want to see the product to be better. You want better broadcasting without the app crashing. You want the fight nights to be better. The officiating during the fights to be better, because that's actually impacting the fights themselves, which is the worst part of it. Like, they do not want the fights to be affected by all of that foolery. I think the UFC is going to be better. I think the quality is going to increase. Maybe with Netflix, it'll be better, but we'll see. They do have potential superstars. And the thing is, they have the star potential. I think Ilia Topuria has a lot of potential to be the next superstar. He should have already had a scheduled fight for Spain. And honestly, him vacating his own belt kind of hurt that as well. I think Khamzat is their guy. That's the one fighter for the UFC that they have to focus on. I don't know what they're going to do. They're going to try to dispel Dricus' plot armor or something, but they need that man to win. They need Khamzat to win, because if Khamzat wins, he's going to be the biggest star in the sport by far. No one's even close. The other potential would be Ilia Topuria, but Ilia vacating his belt, it's a big gamble because he has to now beat Islam to be that star, and that's not an easy thing to do. He must beat Islam now. He could have just reigned over featherweight and defended his belt as many times as he wanted. Fight in Spain's arenas and stuff, it would have been insane for him. But he gambled all that, threw his belt away, and now he has to beat Islam. There's no other way. Islam is a star, but I just don't think he has the star power to rival Khabib and Conor and all these other guys, I think he's the biggest global star in the UFC, even including Alex. If you just look at the social media numbers, I mean, he surpasses Alex by far with social media numbers, not even close. We don't know what any of these guys' pay-per-view numbers are like. All we know is that ESPN is just not happy with the numbers. So all we can really go off of is the social media numbers, and Islam is the biggest, with Khamzat right behind him. And Khamzat's never been a champion, right? Islam, Jones, Alex, Ilia, these guys have all had the push of being champion. Khamzat hasn't. That's the craziest thing about that. If Khamzat wins that belt, that is the cash cow of the UFC. That is the guy they need to push the pay-per-view numbers up. Honestly, him as a superstar is great for the sport because he's very exciting too. He tries to finish the fights in the first round, always been part of a war. His most boring fight was with Kamaru Usman, and that fight wasn't even boring. That fight was good too. Khamzat Chimaev being the next superstar, I think is great for everybody, but he needs to fight more. That's the only thing. If he could get 3 fights in a year as champion, that would be perfect for everybody. Get ready, because that Khamzat Chimaev train is going to be steamrolling ahead with no stops to it. Because if Dricus can't beat him, no one's beating him. If Dricus can't beat Khamzat, there's not a single middleweight soul that's beating that guy. And honestly, I think he beats Dricus. I think Khamzat is the best middleweight in the world. After what he did Robert Whittaker, there's just no debate for me. Like, I think there's not a single middleweight he doesn't beat. If we look at all the skills in the middleweight division of every fighter, think of the best skills at middleweight combining all the fighters, right? So you're thinking of Adesanya's striking and Dricus' use of his attributes and Khamzat's wrestling and stuff like that. Just think of every top tier skill of the middleweight division. I think Khamzat's wrestling is the most impressive by far. He is one of the best wrestlers I've ever seen in MMA. And for a middleweight to be that good is crazy. He is so incredibly technical. He is so ferocious with his takedowns. He has the most unstoppable takedown I've ever seen. His low single leg and low double legs, even Kamaru Usman was not able to. And here's the thing about the Kamaru Usman fight. I think Usman, even on short notice, is better than a lot of the middleweights. I think after all these years, Khamzat will reach that potential of his as being one of the biggest forces in the UFC. I'm going to be honest, man. I think he beats Dricus easy. I think Khamzat's so much better than everybody else at middleweight. It's not even close. That with how easy he beats Dricus, people will start questioning if middleweight was really overrated this whole time, or Khamzat's underrated. But enough talk of the MMA business side of it. I mean, it's not even just business, it's for the fans too, right? It's important for us. And hopefully they do much better, right? Hopefully the sport actually gets better from here. Hopefully the cards get better, the fighters get more skilled, especially the heavier weight classes, because man, they need that. The average light heavyweight and heavyweight has regressed over time. And maybe now with Ankalaev as champ, and with John Jones and Tom Aspinall as champs, perhaps now these fighters need to evolve in order for themselves to become champion, right? No more one-dimensional fighters, no more fighters just relying on their power and stuff like that. They don't even have to be multi-dimensional. They could just be a one-dimensional fighter who has a lot of power that could get them very far. But with these skilled champions at the top, maybe now that creates a new standard for those weight classes, because in the John Jones era, those guys were way better than they are now. It's not even close. Same with the heavyweight division. The heavyweight division, even around Brock Lesnar's time, was better than it is now. The fighters themselves were better. The middleweight division was also better during the Wyman and Rockhold era. But you can't say the same from flyweight to welterweight. These weight classes have always just gotten better. The fighters in those weight classes have always evolved. There's not a single light heavyweight today, besides Ankalaev, that could beat the best fighters of John Jones' era. Not a single one of them. Only maybe Ankalaev, right? Remember who the best fighters were back then. Jon Jones, none of them are beating him. Daniel Cormier, he might be the worst matchup for these light heavyweights today, even more than Jon Jones. Alexander Gustafsson in his prime, none of these guys today are beating him. Anthony Rumble Johnson, Ankalaev could beat him, but no one else is. Right? People say, but what about the wrestling? Well, Rumble used to wrestle. If you watch the Jimmy Manuwa fight, the Phil Davis fight, he could defend a takedown very well. Phil Davis was a decent wrestler too, so he was also a terrifying striker with some of the most power we've ever seen in the light heavyweight division. But I do think Ankalaev could potentially beat him, and that's it. No one else is. They could beat Glover though, right? But those top 4 guys, I don't think so, man. If you really think about it, so Glover Teixeira has always been a very good light heavyweight, but as soon as the top 4 left, he became champion. Nothing stopped him from becoming champion. When Jones, DC, Gustafsson, and Rumble were all gone, and Glover was the next best guy, he became the champion. Very interesting. Now, he did lose to Corey Anderson. Corey Anderson was very underrated. Who were the next best guys? Glover Teixeira, Jan Blachowicz, and Corey Anderson. Those 3 are like roughly around the same level, right? Jan and Glover both became champions. You're probably questioning about Corey. Well, Corey Anderson beat Glover, and he lost to Jan, right? It created that MMA math equation. And the crazy thing is, Jan has been competitive with even the best of today. He fought both Unk and Alex and nearly beat both of them. He went to a draw with Unk, went to a split decision with Alex. Glover went life and death with Jiri. Just shows how good he was, even as an old fighter. And then he lost to Jamahal Hill, but he was done by then. He was like in his mid-40s when he fought Jamahal. And that's why I always thought Jamahal Hill was overrated, man. Because like, his best win was a very old Glover Teixeira, ready to retire. In fact, he did retire after that fight. His other best win was Thiago Santos after the knee injuries, and that fight was competitive up until the knockout, right? That wasn't a prime Thiago Santos. Santos' prime ended with the Jon Jones fight. He was never the same fighter after that. And then who's his other best win? Johnny Walker. So he didn't fight a prime Glover. He didn't fight a prime Santos. The Santos fight was competitive. He clearly beat Glover. And because of the way Jamahal Hill fights, I always knew he wasn't on the same level as guys like Alex and Jiri and Ankalaev and Jan in his prime. Honestly, I think he loses to Khalil Roundtree. He could lose to Rakich. He probably loses to Carlos Olberg. Nikita Krylov would be an interesting fight, but I think Krylov could also beat him. A lot of times people ask me, like, who are the most overrated fighters today? I always thought Jamahal Hill was one of them, which tells you how much championships actually mean in this sport. It doesn't mean you're the best. Becoming champion does not mean you're the best because you didn't fight everybody. Some fighters had the easiest path to a title. Sean O'Malley, for an example. They didn't have to fight all the best fighters. Jamahal Hill never fought Alex when he became champ, or Jiri, or Jan, or Rakich, or Volkan, or Reyes back then. He didn't fight any of these guys. He fought an old Glover, post-injury Santos, and Johnny Walker at the time was decently ranked. Like, we could look at the rankings back in 2022, a few months after he fought Thiago Santos. So Santos left the UFC after that fight, right? He wasn't ranked anymore. Jamahal Hill was ranked number 6 in November of 2022. Look at the guys above him. Anthony Smith, he never fought him. Alexander Rakich, never fought him. Magomed Ankalaev, never fought him. Jan Blachowicz, never fought him. Who did he fight after? He fought for the belt. At that point, because Jiri Prochazka had the injuries and he was out of the rankings, they needed 2 fighters to fight for the vacant title. Of course, Glover is going to be in that fight, but they also went to Jamahal Hill. I think at that point, honestly, any of the top guys would have beaten Glover besides maybe Anthony Smith. I think Rakich would have won, Ankalaev, and Jan, especially after Glover went through that war with Jiri. I don't think he was the same fighter, especially after that. I think in a rematch, he would have beaten Glover Teixeira. And do us the worst thing about one championship not putting on MMA fights as much? They have Roberto Soldic over there. Bro, Roberto Soldic needs to come to the UFC. Yes, he got knocked out 2 fights ago, but it's one loss, you know? And he is the last fighter to beat Dricus. He knocked Dricus out in the 3rd round. At welterweight, not middleweight, but he fights in both weight classes. Soldic fought last month. Before that, about 2 years ago, he fought once in 2022, twice in 2021, once in 2020, which was understandable. It doesn't make any sense. He's in the prime of his career. If one championship cannot give him fights, if any of these organizations cannot give their fighters fights, just send them to the UFC. Now that is counteracting the whole competition between organizations, but there is none. If you just keep them there, these guys are not going to be able to fight. I don't think there can be competition anymore with the UFC. Unless the UFC gets way too intertwined with the WWE and the fans start craving like actual MMA competition, like the true sport of it, then there could be some other organization that comes up and gives us the fights that we want to see, right? It would require that the UFC release Soldic, bring him to the UFC. You know what insane a fight between him and Jeff Neal would be? Or with Jack Della Maddalena? I think he's too small for middleweight. I think his real weight class would be welterweight, but those would be some insane fights, man. And with that, let's go to the questions. We're going to start with Sushant Kop. TheWeasle, great content. Keep up the good work, brother. Thank you so much, man. Question 1. Prime Conor versus Prime Ilia in a 3-round featherweight fight. Who wins? I'll go with Prime Ilia. I think the wrestling would be the biggest difference there. I do think Conor has a good striking style to compete with Ilia. The high kicks, very good against shorter right-handed fighters who commit with that power hand. Conor's very good at slipping on the outside of that, countering with his own left straight, and he has great footwork too. He's the bigger fighter, or longer and taller, but I think Ilia's grappling would be the difference of that fight. Question 2. I want to learn boxing for self-defense and not for competing. Can you recommend any YouTube channel to learn the fundamentals and suggest a training routine that I can follow? I would say joining a gym would be the best thing, but if you want to learn from a YouTube channel, I think Tony Jeffries may have the best channel for fundamental boxing. And as for a training routine, I would just say follow Tony Jeffries. He has an excellent way for, training routines and skills and what you have to do to learn boxing on your own. If you have a partner, you can hit mitts, punch the bag, learn techniques off of that. Shadow boxing is a great thing as well. And of course, working out in general, lifting weights, plyometrics, all of that's going to be very important. Now, for boxing specifically, you probably don't want to be too jacked, you don't want to be too big. But gaining size is going to help your ability to throw a stronger punch, but there is a point of diminishing returns. If you get too big, you don't have the same kind of snap and speed in your punches to be as effective with it. But plyometrics is going to be very important in that as well. Lifting weights to explode for your punches, all of that stuff is going to be a lot better. And you have to focus on your footwork. Footwork is maybe the most important thing in boxing. Your foot positioning on where to throw punches, where to evade, taking angles, and get comfortable at constantly moving around if you have to. One thing I used to do is use the quick ladders. So if you have I think it's called quick ladders, where you put it on the ground and you step in and out of it. There's different kind of footwork drills you can use on that. And I would say just look up on YouTube to keep yourself light on your feet. Very important in boxing. And then question 3. Rate UFC 217 out of 10. In my opinion, one of the best cards in UFC history. I say like a 9 out of 10, 9.5 out of 10. That is one of the absolute best cards ever. That was when GSP beat Michael Bisping and won the middleweight title. And then TJ Dillashaw, Cody Garbrandt, they had the rivalry. TJ knocked him out. Rose Namajunas knocked out Joanna. So all 3 title fights ended with a finish. Stephen Thompson also outclassed Jorge Masvidal on the feet. The striking skills on display from Stephen Thompson. And then Paulo Costa erased Johnny Hendricks in the second round. You also had James Vick knocking out Joseph Duffy with the uppercut. And Joseph Duffy has such potential, but he just never had that big win besides Conor early in their careers. Ovin St. Preux knocking out Corey Anderson with the head kick. One-shot KO, which was crazy because after that loss, Corey Anderson went on a 4-fight win streak, beating Glover Teixeira. And at the time, the very hyped Johnny Walker, I also did hype him a lot, but he knocked out Johnny Walker, the first guy to beat him in the UFC. And that was after the shoulder injury that Walker had. Randy Brown defeated Mickey Gall. Curtis Blades was on the early prelims, finished Alexei Olenek in the second round. Hikaru Hamilton knocked out Ayman Zahabi with a spinning elbow. What an insane card that was. I want to go back and watch it again. And what a Kamikaze. Hi Weasel, amazing content as always. Thank you so much, man. I'd love to get your takes on 2 topics. Who had the worst downfall, Tony Ferguson or BJ Penn? I don't know, man. I don't want to comment too much on BJ Penn, especially with the stuff he's saying now. He's a legend of the sport, and I would say the brain damage throughout his career has taken its effects. He's saying some crazy stuff, man. It's just not good. I don't know how much worse it gets, but hopefully his loved ones, hopefully his friends, keep a good lookout for him, Like career-wise, I would say Tony Ferguson, just because he went on the longest loss streak in UFC history, but who took like the worst damage? Maybe BJ Penn. We don't see a whole lot of fighters who mentally change after their careers are done in comparison to boxing, right? There's much more head trauma and brain damage in boxing, but when you see BJ Penn, you can't help but feel bad for him, man. I mean, this is the same guy who essentially carried the lightweight division, and now look what it is. Without BJ Penn, they probably never would have brought the lightweight division back, or maybe way later. Who knows if Frank Yeager would ever have became the lightweight champion if it wasn't for BJ Penn and Benson Henderson and Anthony Pettis. Maybe they would have introduced it with the absorption of the WEC, but he was the most important lightweight of all time. Great career, especially when he was winning. He was willing to fight anybody. Any weight class didn't matter. He was there to scrap. But maybe finding all those bigger guys and coming back, going against Yair Rodriguez and Dennis Seaver, and at a point in his career where he should have retired. I don't know. It's just really sad. And for those who don't know, like, he's talking, I don't know. It kind of hurts to even say it, man. He's like questioning his own mother that the CIA like replaced his mom with someone else to spy on him or something. Like, it's getting to that level, man. It's really sad. And with brain damage, with CTE, it only gets worse. He was even getting knocked out on the streets with that one bigger guy. And then your second question. On the current lightweight matchmaking, we have Max and Ilia entering title contention. Justin recently beating Rafael Fiziev. Armin not getting the next title shot. And Oliveira's only recent win coming against a 2-4 Chandler. How would you matchmake the 155 division in 2025? Looking forward to your breakdown. Thank you so much, man. Yeah, lightweight is still very strong, but it's just not a lot of guys are coming off win streaks like they used to, right? At one point, it was like all the top guys were on win streaks. Now, because they've been there for so long. Dustin, Justin, Charles, Fiziev, all these guys have been in the rankings for so long. They have some wins, they have some losses. The best have been established. Islam Makhachev has established himself as the very best fighter in the weight class. After Khabib retired, it was like everybody's fighting to become the best fighter in the weight class, to establish themselves. It was Charles and then Islam established himself. But how would I matchmake the lightweight division now? I would say Islam Makhachev versus Ilia Topuria. Even though, just in theory, I don't like a champion with only one title defense jumping up to the next weight class and getting a title shot, but there's no one else really there to get a title shot. I mean, you could give it to Armin, but he pulled out last time. And Dana said he's not going to give Armin a title shot, right? He needs another win. So I would do Islam versus Ilia, biggest fight in the UFC. Then for Armin Tsarukyan, I would do the Charles rematch. Those two are at the top of the weight class. Their first fight was very close and should have been 5 rounds. And it should be 5 rounds in the rematch. That's the fight to do next. And the winner of that gets a title shot. But there is Justin Gaethje, who's just coming off a win against Rafael Fiziev. But if we're going to be honest, man, Fiziev is number 11. Does one win off of Fiziev get you a title shot? Well, it did for Dustin Poirier when he beat Benoit Saint-Denis. But even at that time, people thought that he didn't deserve a title shot. And it should be the same thing with Justin Gaethje. I think Justin should fight Dan Hooker. I'd like to see that fight get rescheduled. Right? I don't think Justin should get a title shot over Armin especially. Even though Armin's not getting a title shot, I don't think Justin should leapfrog over him with a win over Fiziev. And then Dustin Poirier. I would say Dustin versus Max. Let's do the third fight. Dustin, I would say, is the hardest to matchmake, but the Max Holloway fight would be awesome, right? It would be Dustin's retirement fight against a familiar opponent and a version of Max Holloway better than any other that Dustin's ever fought before, right? Dustin fought him twice, and neither versions of those Max were as good as this one now. The first Max fight was a long time ago in the featherweight division. The second Max fight was on short notice, and it was clear that Max just wasn't physically ready for lightweight. This is a much better version of Max to fight Dustin, but the only thing is you lost to the guy twice, so why would you get a third fight with him, Dustin, I would say, is the hardest guy to matchmake right now, unless you want to give him Armin, but then you're risking Armin as a number 1 contender, right? That's why I don't, for business, I wouldn't give Dustin Armin Tsarukyan, because what happens if Dustin beats him and then retires? That kind of hurts the lightweight division. They could do the Justin and Dustin rematch, but Justin said that he's not going to fight Dustin, so there goes that. I don't think the Dan Hooker fight, Dan Hooker makes sense, but I think Hooker versus Gaethje is a much more logical fight to do. You don't give him Chandler, Gamrot trains with him, they won't fight each other. So Max is the most logical opponent for Dustin right now. Dan Hooker should fight Justin Gaethje. Michael Chandler's fighting Paddy Pimblett. They could do Mateusz Gamrot versus Ignacio Bahamondes. Reschedule Beneil Dariush versus Renato Moicano. That's a great fight. Rafael Fiziev is saying he's going to go to featherweight, so they could do Rafael Fiziev versus Kelvin Kattar. That'd be an amazing fight. Benoit Saint-Denis is fighting Yoel Alvarez, and then Grant Dawson maybe fights the winner of Benoit Saint-Denis and Yoel Alvarez, or he can fight the winner of Beneil Dariush and Renato Moicano. And then we go to Nano Peach. Hi Weasel, amazing content as always. Thank you so much. Big Onk versus the top 15 at 205. So Big Onk versus Anthony Smith. Well, we already saw that. I thought Smith retired. Ankalaev versus Alonzo Menafield absolutely destroys him. Bogdan Gushkov, better fight, but he beats Gushkov. Azamat Murzakanov, Ankalaev easily wins. Dominic Reyes, Ankalaev wins for sure. He knocks out Johnny Walker again. He beats Volkan Oezdemir. Good fight with Nikita Krylov, but Ankalaev would win that as well. Easily beats Khalil Rountree. Beats Carlos Ulberg, but I think a tougher fight than most would expect. I think Ulberg's striking is actually really good. He beats Rakic again. Easily beats Jamal Hill. Beats this version of Jan Blachowicz, right? I think he's only getting better. Whereas Jan, I don't think is in his prime anymore. He easily beats Jiri, and then he beats Alex in a rematch. Very close fight. Should Jalin Turner retire? If he thinks he should, then yeah. If your mind and heart are not in the sport, you shouldn't be fighting, right? You're going up against guys who their all is into this, If Jalin Turner's not as focused, if he's not as hungry as these other fighters to become the best in the world, then he shouldn't be fighting. And from his last fight, it looked like he didn't even want to fight, so yeah, he should retire. I agree with Dana White when he says that if fighters are thinking about retiring, they should retire. What's next for Fiziev? Kelvin Kattar at featherweight. A few people, including John Anik, are saying that Justin should get the next title shot. Your opinion? Makes no sense. Yeah, it doesn't make any sense. He should not be leapfrogging Armin Tsarukyan, even if Armin pulled out. Justin's coming off one win against the number 11 ranked fighter. Nobody was agreeing with Dustin fighting Islam, right? Same thing. Nobody should be agreeing with Justin fighting Islam. It's like the exact same scenario, except, yeah, technically Justin did beat Dustin a few fights ago, but still, it makes no sense to put him above Armin Tsarukyan. Justin needs another win, maybe even two, honestly. Especially if Armin and Charles are above him. It's going to be hard for him to fight for the title above those two, if those guys are still winning. And then if Volk's chin is good against Lopez, what are his chances? Oh, he wins. If he doesn't get chinned by Lopez in the first round, he's going to win the fight. I think he's a much better fighter than Lopez. It's just that first round is very dangerous. And if his chin is made of glass, Lopez is going to KO him in the first. But if he could take a decent shot, then he should win. If Ilia would take some time to fill his body up to 155 like Maximus Holloway, how would he do against the top 15? Oh, very well. If he can walk into the cage at like 170 pounds, he's going to be starching a lot of these guys. So the top 15. I think think Ignacio Bahamondes is actually a tough fight for him, stylistically. 6'3" fighter with really good high kicks, good counterpunching. I think he still wins, because if he gets in close, he just annihilates Bahamondes, but to get close to Bahamondes is very dangerous. You gotta pass the head kicks, the counterpunches, all that stuff. Grant Dawson, he absolutely destroys Grant Dawson. Bro, Grant Dawson wouldn't have a chance against Ilia Topuria. That would be such a horrible fight for Grant Dawson. Benno St. Denis gets absolutely torched, KO'd first round, no problem for Ilia. Paddy Pimblett gets annihilated. Bro, if Tony Ferguson can pressure Paddy to the fence and get in close, watch Tony Ferguson can do that, he doesn't have a chance against Ilia. He would have to hope he can land a flying knee or head kick. That's it. There's nothing else he could do to him. Rafael Fiziev, good fight, but Fiziev will slow down. In the pocket, Fiziev has good kicks, he has good counter punches, but he doesn't match the punching technique of Ilia Topuria. I think Ilia lights him up in the pocket. Renato Moicano gets destroyed. Ilia will slip his jab and KO him first round. But Neil Dariush has no chance against Ilia. He has good grappling, but what does he do in the stand-up with him? He's gonna box with Ilia, southpaw versus orthodox, open stance fight. Ilia would finish him in the first round. Mateusz Gamrot. Gamrot's somewhat defensive, so he would draw out the fight. He would never be successful with his offense. Like, what does he do offensively that would beat Ilia Topuria? Like, maybe he can wrestle with him, right? Maybe he can get him down and get some good positions, but with damage, like, where does he damage Ilia? Nowhere. In every round, Ilia would win because of the damage he would inflict. With his striking, he would also expect the takedowns. He has a very good stance to sprawl on top of those. He'll land the same kind of punches, but from orthodox that Dariush was able to land. Michael Chandler has a puncher's chance, and that's it. As soon as they start throwing some strikes, Chandler will understand that there's levels to striking. He'll probably try to overpower him with his size, but that's where he runs into the right hand and gets knocked out, right? Where his technique fails, he will rely on his attributes, explode. Ilia slips, counters him, KOs him first or second rounds. It wouldn't be too different than the way Patricio Pitbull knocked him out. Now, this is a tougher fight. Dan Hooker is very durable. He's a lot bigger, very long with his punches, but lacks defensively for Ilia. He would eat a lot of shots, but eventually gets KO'd. I think this is the guy who would like flatline KO Dan Hooker, but it could take like 2 rounds. Maximus is better. He'll probably last until like the 3rd and 4th rounds, but I think there he'll get KO'd. It would be a good fight though, up until then. Maximus Holloway would be the toughest fight so far for Ilia until he gets to Dustin. Now, Dustin, stylistically, may be the very best fight in the lightweight division ever. Like, there's no better fight than to watch Dustin Poirier versus Ilia Topuria. Do you know how insane that fight would be? Arguably the 2 best boxers in UFC history. Throwing down for 5 rounds. They're both good offensively, defensively. They both have punching power. Great jabs, great feints, good counter punching. Just the highest level of technique from both guys, with the ability to finish each other at any moment. But I think this version of Dustin, at the end of his career, is not prime Dustin. I think Ilia would eventually finish him. He'll have the speed advantage. He might have the power advantage. I think he probably hits harder. I think Dustin in his prime could beat Ilia, but now I don't think so. And then Justin Gaethje, he gets KO'd. You can't sit in the pocket and cover up against Ilia. That's the worst way to fight against him. Like, you're going to welcome him in the pocket and cover up with 4-ounce gloves. That is the last place you want to be against Ilia. And Justin would have to move around. He would have to fight Ilia the way he fought Khabib. Move around constantly, punch and move, leg kicking moments. He cannot stand in front of Ilia. He'll get annihilated. And I think that shot would eventually land for Ilia Topuria because he's a lot faster. And when you constantly pressure Justin, he does start to slow down. So I would think Ilia would eventually land that shot, maybe in the 2nd or 3rd rounds. Charles Oliveira. Now, this is a difficult fight because Charles has the most potent offense out of any fighter in this division. Defensively, he's cooked. Even though his defense is getting better, at this point, he doesn't have the head movement yet. He doesn't have the footwork yet, or the ability to block the punches effectively. But offensively, he has everything he needs to land a decent shot and knock Ilia out. But I think because the defense is still behind the match, the offense of Ilia, he would get knocked out. So I'll go Ilia Topuria, maybe 1st or 2nd round knockout. Then Arman Tsarukyan. I would say Ilia knocks out Arman Tsarukyan. The wrestling would be a hindrance, but eventually he would land that shot. And Arman slows down, right? He's won 5 rounds once in his career, and that's when he lost to Gamrot. But he did have good cardio against Charles for 3 rounds. But I would think Ilia Topuria knocks him out. And then Islam Makhachev, I would go with Islam. He's just too good at the end of the day. He has the wrestling. He has the 5-round cardio. He has the striking abilities that Arman doesn't have. Good high kicks, very good in the clinch to land knees against a shorter opponent. So he's not necessarily out of his element if Ilia gets in close because he has the clinch and he's very good there, shown in the Dustin fight. And he can shoot takedowns at any time to offset Ilia Topuria. But I do think Ilia has a big chance of winning too. It's not like a one-sided domination for Islam Makhachev. Then why doesn't Bobby Green retire? I don't know. Like, he just likes to fight. That's his 2nd loss in a row, and both are 1st-round finishes. He got choked out by Paddy and then KO'd by Hoofy. And 2 fights before that, got destroyed by Jalin Turner in the 1st round as well. In fact, his last 5 losses have all been finishes. Only one of those got out of the 1st round, and that was Drew Dober. He probably should retire, but if he wants to keep fighting, if that's what he wants to do, and he's going to keep fighting. They just have to matchmake him against lesser competition because Green is still somewhat decent, right? He's not completely washed, so they could give him some lesser fighters if he wants to keep fighting. And then, as always, you are the GOAT. Keep the podcast going. Much love, brother. Thank you so much, man. And yes, I will keep the podcast going weekly. I know it's been like a month and a half since the last one, but it will be weekly. And then we go to the public questions. We start with Pringles Can. What would it take? Who is Joe? Who's Joe? What would it take? What would it take for Dana to get John Jones to take the fight with Tom Aspinall? I mean, there's a lot of things he could do, but I don't know. Then with the Cobro, how can MMA be considered a sport when the judges have no idea what they're watching, the refs never deduct points or enforce penalties for repeated fouls, and a champion could fight a 42-year-old man who hasn't fought in 4 years over an interim champion? Thanks, Weasel. Love the content. You see what I'm saying, dude? Like, we're all fans of MMA, right? We've been watching MMA for a while. We love this sport. But it's like I've been saying, how are there the same 4 or 5 judges for every fight? I have no idea. Derek Cleary, Sal D'Amato, Junichiro Kamijo. That was a Rampage moment. I'm sorry. Who's the other judge? I'm like, it's the same guys. It's the same exact people scoring the fights after constantly scoring the fights incorrectly. It seems like every fight card has one robbery. How is that possible? That's way too much, man. Do you know how much that affects a fighter's career? And like Dana would say, we're not judges, we don't understand the fights. Bro, the judges don't even understand the fights. I think the fans understand the fights way more than the judges do. He's appealing to authority, man. He's doing that same fallacy of we're not the judges, we don't know as much as they do. Bro, we can all read how they score fights. It's very easy to understand. They are literally scoring fights where one fighter gets a 30-27 scorecard and the other one gets a 29-28. What happened there? You know what I'm saying? Like, how does one fighter that literally happened on the last pay-per-view card, and then the referees not deducting points? It literally says the eye pokes are fouls. These guys are winning with eye pokes. They're getting win bonuses. Next ranked contender fights. Potentially they can even get championship fights. Fighters are winning belts off of eye pokes. In basketball, if one of the players travels, the referees aren't just going to overlook that like they do in MMA. They can go back to the replay, they see the eye pokes, and you have guys like Chris Weidman who's double eye poking combo winning the fights. And you have Manel Kep full on assault to the one left eye of Asu Almabayev. He was attacking one singular eye the entire fight, and he's winning off of that. He got a TKO after poking the left eye of Almabayev the entire fight. John Jones made a career off this. Daniel Cormier won the heavyweight title off of it. Sean O'Malley getting another title shot against Merab Dvalishvili just because the UFC wants him to be champion. Same with Israel Adesanya. They give him an immediate title shot after losing to Sean Strickland against Dricus. The entirety of 2024 was champions versus undeserving challengers. Kai Asakura, Dustin Poirier, Stipe Miocic, Khalil Roundtree, Marlon Vera. They're cutting good fighters like Taylor Lapilus, fighters who are on win streaks but keeping around bar brawlers on loss streaks who are getting knocked out fight after fight just because they're more exciting but way worse of fighters. Like, I just don't understand. We're all big UFC fans and we want to see them do better. And honestly, maybe this mandatory title defense stuff that boxing does would be a good idea for MMA because how some of the champions are not fighting the number one contenders. Good question, man. And I've had a long frustration with the way the UFC has been doing things, the way the fight cards are being structured, and champions not fighting the number one contenders. And then I see guys getting undeserved title shots, and the refereeing and the scorecards are horrible. And it's like, it makes you wonder, like, what is going on with this sport? It's not just one thing, it's multiple different things with the UFC. It's at the point where it's affecting the fights. The fights have always been the best part of MMA, but because of the refs and the judges, it's impacting the fights. That's the worst part of all of it. And what does the UFC say about that? They can't do anything about it. It's not them, it's the commission. Sorry, excuse my passion. But man, it's just like every card, Look at Sheldon. Not a question, but you should start doing YouTube shorts, breaking down game plans and signature techniques by Fighters Edit. By the way, you have the perfect voice for background noise. Thank you so much. I could do shorts, it's just, I'm not the best at editing those. It seems like shorts have like a certain way of editing that's more professional. Now, I do have some editors that I could use that I do with my history podcast with those shorts. Yeah, it would be cool. They would Anaba. Bro, face reveal when? Let me see what the replies say. Hopefully never. I like the mystery. I could do the face reveal and start using the camera for the live streams, right? So there is an audience there that can watch the live streams and that like the face reveal stuff. Now, I do understand why it's important to do the face reveal and stuff like that. It's the meta, it's the trend. It's the way everybody's doing it for all different kinds of content. Maybe I do that just for the streams. What do you guys think about that? So if you guys never want to have a face reveal, you guys don't care about it at all, you guys always have the same content. But for anybody that wants the face reveal, I'll have the live streams for that. And then we go to Hafazan Karl. John Silva and Mauricio Ruffy versus the top 15 of their divisions. So John Silva, I think, beats Dan Ige, beats Calvin Kattar, beats Bryce Mitchell. Close fight with Yusuf Zalal, as I think Zalal will eventually be maybe in the top 10, top 5. Should be a good fight, but I think John Silva would win. Beats Shikadze, beats Murphy, beats Sterling, beats Emmett, Arnold Allen. I think he beats Allen, but very close fight. He beats Ortega, beats Rodriguez, beats Evloev, beats Lopez, loses to Holloway. If Volk is still in his prime, he loses to Volk. But if he's chinny, then he beats Volk, then loses to Ilia. And then for Mauricio Ruffy, so close fight with Bahamondes, but I think he wins. He beats Dawson, beats Benoit Saint Denis, beats Patty, beats Fiziev, beats Moicano, beats Dariush, beats Gamrot, beats Chandler. Close fight with Hooker, but I think he wins. Loses to Holloway, loses to Dustin, beats Justin, loses to Oliveira, loses to Armin, and loses to Islam. They go to Olif and 10 start. How would Ankalaev versus Khamzat go? I think Ankalaev would win. He has good takedown defense, or at least shown in his Krylov fight. He's got better since that, and I think he's a better striker as well. He could counterpunch the aggressiveness of Khamzat. Yeah, I think Ankalaev would win that fight, which means that if Khamzat wins the belt, he most likely is not going to go up to 205 unless Ankalaev loses. So the 3 championship won't really be there for Khamzat. Then with the Disco Fox. How are elite fighters getting pinned against the fence in the UFC? And what are the things they can do to get off of the fence? As always, thank you for your informative breakdowns. No problem, man. Thank you so much for the question. I don't want to say it's a fence fighting meta, because it really isn't. There's not a lot of fighters getting pinned up against the fence as much as it seems. There's a load of fighters who are able to get away from the fence. It's just like Alex Pereira and Jose Aldo. They lost fights or lost rounds because of that. It's not that there's an issue with the sport, as much as there's an issue with those fighters specifically. With Jose Aldo, he's not in his prime anymore, right? Jose Aldo had to fight against that when he was in his prime as well, and he was able to defend against it. Frankie Edgar tried that. Chad Mendes tried that. In fact, Chad Mendes got knocked out in the first round against Aldo when he tried to hold him on the fence. With Alex, he just isn't as good in his wrestling. He's not as good in his grappling. Yeah, there's not like a widespread issue with elite fighters in the UFC. It's just that there's a part of their skill set that they're lacking in. And how can they defend against that? Well, footwork is the number one thing. Do not get pressured against the fence. That's the number one thing, which also combines with you have to be well-rounded. Because if a takedown threat is getting a fighter to move into the fence, they're just not well-rounded enough. They're giving way too much respect for that takedown because they should not be on the fence against a wrestler, especially a chain wrestler. Like a lot of the Dagestani wrestlers are, the Caucasus wrestlers in general, wrestle differently than the Americans. They have for a long time. It's something I mentioned a long time ago. I talked about this years ago, about how different the Russian style wrestling is compared to the American style. And the Russian style wrestling is a lot more effective when there's a fence there. The American style wrestling is a lot more about explosions in the center of the cage. They're a lot better there. But the Russian style wrestling is very good against a wall or a fence. It allows them to chain wrestle, so the initial shot is not the one that takes the opponent to the ground. It's made to create contact and push them to the fence, and the fence is reinforcement for them to chain wrestle, right? They can use that as balance to lean into while they're taking their opponent to the ground. And this is a style of wrestling that every fighter needs to learn, either offensively or defensively, like a lot of the Caucasus wrestlers do. And in fact, like Daniel Cormier has talked about it before. He said about a long time ago that these Dagestanis are bringing in a different type of wrestling. I think the fighters got really good with hand fighting against the grip, but they haven't got as good at escaping the fence. And most of it is revolved around footwork to not be there in the first place. Great questions. And the next episode will be up next week. I'm going to give my picks for the Leon and Brady card maybe on Monday or Tuesday. And then the next episode will be up maybe Thursday or Friday next week. And that's the end of the episode, guys. I hope you guys enjoyed. And if you guys did, make sure to give it a like, make sure to subscribe to the bell for notifications, and I'll see you guys in the next video.